veins of sun. For the spirit, for Romy, Sydney, Tracy, Judy, Stanley, and Obaldemir, for my brothers and sisters. And the light swimming down into the thunder of silence, come, O Brathwaite, to flower like the flame into simplicity. Come, O Brathwaite, the womb of the wind is silence, Wayne Brown. The air singing clouds, the moon a curve of shining milk, the feathers on fire foaming, the air singing clouds of dancing pearl foaming, the fluorescent light dancing over the book's sleeping leaves, the pages of words sleeping, the feathers foaming fire, the clouds dancing in salt shirts, the shirts of ivory healing the feathers of salt and fire, the sky floating on stars, the stars singing to soil their celestial milk of floating foam, the sky singing clouds, the foam of cloud dancing, the salt foam singing, the feathers foaming, the clouds floating elephants of pearl, the feathers foaming, the bread of fire foaming sky, the sky singing clouds, the clouds dancing in floating salt, the salt singing sky, the night drinking abyss, the night abyss of black coral jeweled with floating salt, the feathers foaming, the lightning larynx, the kaleidoscope vision singing sky, the veins of sun singing, the waves foam salt circles of moon drinking the dark sea, the fires foaming to ash of soil, to light foaming healing pearls, the visions in his veins floating to sky, larynx of fire foaming the skies, the pink hibiscus like a feathery conch shell of singing vaginas of sky, the feathers foaming, the tiger turning to water, the feathers foaming, the feathers blossoming, scrabble haiku of letters of flame, scrabble ties scaling off the scrabble board like fish scales of wooden sound, dogs barking, echoing the night in flashing teeth, pages dancing in the fan's breeze underneath a fluorescent lamp of pearl light, and kaleidoscope's close watch, the echo vibration sounding the skull to sleep. A poem drinks the lamp's light, the soil sleeping in my pen, the ink of black abyss of womb, night of life, source of birth, sky singing silence. My mother is the rock of moons, her face is full of doves, her womb the cosmic universe of spirits. My father is the tiger son, he is beyond a warrior, he is beyond a seer. One day the spirit will tell you what, spirit of spirit, source of spirits. This paper, like a flat pearl, this ink liquid soil illuminating the pupils of black sky, the moon singing, the sound singing sky, the sky singing lungs, the lightning larynx, the feathers foaming, the skin singing, the sound sweating, the lightning lungs, the sky singing in the lungs, the lightning soaked with salt, the sky singing in the lungs, the lightning soaked with salt, the words foaming from ink abyss, from a salt of paper, the lightning of the computer screen, the blinking cursor foaming ink, dancing ink of abyss wombs, the feathers foaming, the feathers foaming, the fires foaming, the fires foaming, the fires foaming, foaming, flaming in freedom's diamond of visions, the feathers foaming, the feathers foaming, the feathers foaming in air, in cool, cool air, the feathers foaming in air, in sky, the feathers foaming fire, the feathers foaming fire, the feathers foaming fire, the air speaking or ashes, the feathers foaming, the feathers flowering, the feathers flowering, the feathers flowering, the feathers flowering, the feathers foaming, the feathers flaming, your feather the foam, your feather the foam, your feather the foam, the shadows sleeping, the feathers foaming, the feathers floating, the shadows sleeping, the sky wings with salt, the vain ankle hair dancing, the vain ankle hair dancing, the feathers foaming, the clouds of air, the sea of waves, the leaves of grass, Walt Whitman, universe of words of fire, all foaming, the fire foaming, the lightning launching from the lungs launching from the larynx, the doors open, light seeking light, the lightning laughing, the thunder talking to thunder, the feathers foaming, the fires foaming, the fires foaming, the veins of sun singing, the feathers foaming, the feathers foaming, the feathers foaming, the feathers foaming, the fires foaming, the waves foaming, the wind sailing the sky foam of clouds, the clouds singing the wind of veins, the veins of sun singing sky, the red fireworks of flowers, of blood songs, standing the air in upright prickles of feathers and singular freedom of God's divine fire, of God's divine freedom, the flamboyant green fans of multitudinous leaves, the hands that planted these plants, growing silently in the soil, feeding the roots with sun and sweat, the parallel poison drained, the serpent biting its own tail, the venom of its beginning, the sun serpent spinning in sun, sprayed with sun. I kiss my mother through these roots of sun. I kiss my father through these roots of sky. The poison evaporated, the poison is ash, the sea soaked with salt, the sea singing, the sky singing, the feathers foaming, the feather foaming, the feathers foaming, the sea singing its naked song of salt, the foam, pearls of foam flying to sky, to cloud, the fire foaming in the leaves lungs for the roots lungs for the lungs lightning, the lightning larynx, the sun soaked with fire foaming, the air, the sky clouds singing, the lungs laughing lightning, the fire foaming, the sleeping in my skull, the sky sleeping in my lungs, the sun sleeping in my skull, the lightning larynx, the feathers foaming from trees, fruits of flight singing the fire of freedom's infinite sight, the stars soaked with salt, swimming in sky, the feathers foaming to flight, the foam kissing stars, the paper flying foaming to ash, to paper again floating to foam, the feathers foaming, the stars soaked with salt, the cloud of salt, the stars swimming in sky, the feathers foaming, the feathers floating, the salt singing the sea, the fire foaming, the feathers floating to sky of dancing pearls, of clouds of cosmic milk, the feathers foaming, the feathers take flight, foaming with fire of freedoms, lungs lightning, the lungs laughing to lightning, the shadows sleeping, 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 blossoming to bone, the silence singing to my skull, the thunder drinking the stone, my weapons weeping, the shadows swimming, the lungs launch from the lungs launch to the sun of laughter, the silence sings to my skull, the petals foam light, the feathers foam fire, the flowers foaming, the fire foam, the feathers foaming like fires foaming, the serpents, the constellations singing, the eagle of light talons, the sun, the crystal of memory, the embryo eclipse foaming sky. Listen, listen, listen. Listening to the lungs, this egg of light cannot burst. My blood blazing with roses, my heart flying with muscle and 9 bears, my heart a floating constellation of muscle and roses. Tear this page of skull before it foams bone, the feathers foaming to sky, to cloud, cloud of cosmic sight, clouds of skulls of kaleidoscopic dance of ancient sun. In my right eye is the sun of 9 serpents. In my left eye is the black flame of cosmic wombs. The eagle of 3 heads looks into the heart of 9 bear. You listen with the spirit's ears. You see with the spirit's eyes. I am your thoughts. A road of stars is blossoming from the womb of your mouth. A dove of flight is birthing from the diamond of your freedom. Spirit, spirit, spirit. the feathers foaming to sky, the lungs launching to light, the lungs forming to flower. The Spirit has opened my vision, my Father's head of lightning wisdom, his sacred heart of divine love for God, my mother's hands of dove infinity of hearts, my mother, the rock of Belize, the New Jerusalem, navigating my journey with her crystal courage, with her womb of origins of universe, birthing the light of God's divine fire in hearts of beauty, the flames foaming to feathers, floating frequently on diamonds of fire and flights of imagination, storms sleeping in shadow. There will be no more storms. Your lightning larynx floating to cloud, the feathers foaming, floating through space, waiting for gravity, the stars foaming crystal milk, the sun foaming light, the serpent circling the sun, her breast foaming like ocean and feathers, the feathers foaming like pearls, the fire foaming, the shadows of storms sleeping in my skull, singing skies, the fires foaming in my chest, the sky singing in my lungs, the vision vanishing into visions, the cloud foaming still, doves of peace, the lungs, the lightning lungs, larynx, feathers of foam, feathers of fire, feathers of water, feathers of sky foaming in eternity's ears. No steam can remove the feathers of sky. The Spirit is the wind. Your Father controls the water. Your mother is a rock of wombs. The fire foaming into feathers. Flight. These ideas floating from the sun of my imagination. My larynx lined with lightning and ash. Milky Way dark rift of wombs. Mouth. Road. Birth canal. Door. Crook in tree, the Maya vision of zeros, wombs of sight and astral water, Milky Way, elliptic crossing point of harmonies and birth, navel, umbilicus, center, hole, fifth direction, feathered serpents flaming, mouth giving birth to sound. You are going to give birth to a road of stars, black hole of womb, from the mouth, the cosmic cave of creation, the space of sound, sound flames, twin serpents, flaming feathered serpents, for the Maya, serpents of knowledge and wisdom, biting their tails, drinking their venoms to visions of freedom in God's divine womb of fire, the mind, the cave of cosmic origins, birthing universes from particles of nothing. You are going to pave a road of stars with your mouth, with the womb of your mouth, galactic center, cosmic center, throne, heart, cosmic womb, the Spirit, he and she whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere, singing the future from the throat of wombs, from a single particle of light, source of origins, source of birth, source of song, birth of the universe, birds of fire singing their songs of divine freedom, from wings of abyss flight, from wombs of song, float through sky, cosmic serpent of fire float in my larynx, lungs launched, water from the sky road, mouth, womb, road, womb. This bird of fire floating through my lungs, my hands of ash turning to light, the feathers of fire foaming, hold your pen of fire and write, words of fire, words flying to foam, flying to feathers of foam, the silence singing to my skull, the crocodile Milky Way, light launching from the lungs, the light feast, light launching from the lungs, the light feast, the sun's flight, light launching from the lungs, light launching from the lungs, light launching from the lungs launch the light of diamonds and freedom, diamonds of songs, diamonds of fire in God's divine freedom. The arrow of absence aches the air, you will no longer ache. A road of stars will blossom from the womb of your mouth. You are going to give birth to a road of stars with the womb of your mouth. From the eye of your God, you are going to give birth to a road of stars with the womb of your mouth. Lightning in the lungs, a womb of stars is blossoming from your mouth. The flowers foaming from sky, the sky singing stars and clouds, the stars singing, the lightning larynx launch in all directions home, the fire foaming, flying feathers, the feathers floating, the seas sleeping in my skull, the feathers foaming, the sea of salt sleeping in sky, the sky sleeping in the stars, songs of freedom.